want to thank Myrtle McMahon, Alvin Migdal, and Joyce Seychelle for their help with this service. I especially want to thank them for lighting the menorah and saying the prayers. That was very beautiful. When the worship team decided that it would be interesting to do a service about Hanukkah, it happened to be my turn to lead. I asked myself, what do I know about Hanukkah? Not very much. I have never lived where I had Jewish friends or even acquaintances, and it's just never been something I paid attention to. At first, I felt embarrassed about my uninformed state, and I still do somewhat. But I also thought that it was possible that I might not be alone. So I will try today to talk not only about Hanukkah itself, but also to provide some context for it. We will look at Jewish history and tradition, holidays, and symbols. Judaism is the first great monotheistic religion, and both Christianity and Muslim faiths were based on it. History is of the utmost importance in Judaism. The sacred texts of most ancient religions focus on myths and philosophical concepts, while the Jewish Bible is centered around historical narrative, and most Jewish holidays are intended to connect modern Jews with their historical ancestors and traditions. The ancient Hebrew people were semi-nomadic herdsmen and farmers living in tribes in the area of Mesopotamia. Contributions to their society by nearby cultures include a West Semitic concept of divine messengers, Old Babylonian law, Mesopotamian cosmogony and primitive history, Canaanite language and mythological literature, and Egyptian hymns and wisdom literature. All of these cultures featured belief in gods who were both creators and protectors, a system of ethics, and important religious rituals. Hebrew history, as recorded in the Bible and other texts, begins about 3,000 years BCE with Abraham, who is considered the founder of the Jewish religion. Abraham, the first of the great prophets, was believed to be chosen by God as the Jewish people who came after him were chosen. He was not the discoverer of God, but was rather called by the God who was already known into a covenant in which God promised him many descendants and the land of Canaan in return for loyalty and obedience. According to biblical tradition, a famine caused the Hebrew tribes to migrate to Egypt, where they were enslaved. God rescued them from bondage by afflicting the Egyptians with successive plagues and then drowning the Egyptian army in the Red Sea to allow the Hebrews to escape. At Mount Sinai, God established the nation of Israel, which is named for Abraham's grandson, Jacob, as his own, and gave them the terms of his covenant with them. He then sustained the Israelites through 40 years of journeying in the wilderness before leading them into Canaan, the land promised to Abraham. Canaan is now approximately Israel and the Palestinian territories. Moses was the central figure in these events, and he, like Muhammad, fulfilled many leadership roles, including religious, political, legislative, and military. Moses was given the 10 Commandments, the laws by which the people should live. The commandments revealed to Moses were the outline of a religion centered on the covenant between God and the people of Israel. The covenant required exclusive loyalty to the God who had rescued them from bondage in Egypt. Worship of other gods, veneration of idols, and magical practices were prohibited. Rituals and festivals were established to celebrate God's historical and continuing care and protection. For a time, Israel was a stable kingdom ruled by kings, Saul, David, Solomon, who ruled from about 960 970 to 931 BCE. After Solomon's reign, the nation split into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Both were repeatedly conquered, exiled, otherwise forced to leave their homeland. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE. The Israelites would be scattered and fragmented for much of their remaining history. The Pharisees were one school of Jewish belief that sought to preserve Jewish scholarship and tradition regardless of who ruled them. They developed into what is called rabbinical Judaism. The rabbis sought to reinterpret Jewish concepts and practices in the absence of the temple and for a people in exile. Rabbinical Judaism was the dominant form of the Jewish religion for nearly 18 centuries. It produced the Talmud, the Midrash, and the great figures of medieval Jewish philosophy. The Torah encompasses the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Talmud is sometimes called the Oral Torah. Orthodox Jews believe that God gave Moses additional instructions that were not written down. Finally, in the 2nd century, these laws were written, and the document became known as the Mishnah. The next few centuries added more commentary. This additional commentary is the Gemara. The Mishnah plus the Gemara comprise the Talmud. The Midrash is a collection of stories and allegories passed down orally and is used to teach spiritual, ethical, and moral values. Jewish spiritual life centers on the Sabbath, the synagogue, and traditional practices and holidays. The Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday and lasts until sundown on Saturday. What struck me about it as I read was not so much the description of the traditions of prayers, lighting candles, and so on. It was the idea of withdrawing into peace for 24 hours. For 24 hours, the family is separated from the workaday world and workaday responsibilities and turns inward for renewal. It sounds very peaceful. It reminded me of one of Russell's most recent services when he talked about meditation as a way to stop the world, if only briefly. Hanukkah is only one of the Jewish holidays. Yom Kippur and Passover, as well as others, are days of deep spiritual significance for Jews. They are marked by special services at the synagogue, special prayers, and restrictions on normal activities. They are meant to be set aside from everyday life. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are referred to as the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah begins a 10-day period of prayer and repentance. Jews reflect on what they may have done wrong or failed to do and ask God to forgive them. On the final day, Yom Kippur, they may fast. They ask forgiveness of God and of their friends and family for any wrongs they may have committed. The end of this holy day is marked by the blowing of the shofar, the ram's horn trumpet. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur mark the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Passover is a holiday of remembrance for events long ago. It celebrates the exodus of the enslaved Jews from Egypt. The celebration traditionally begins with a special meal called a Seder, which includes unleavened bread, because the escaping slaves did not have time to wait for their bread to rise. Seder means order in Hebrew and refers to the traditional order in which certain foods are eaten during this meal. A roasted bone of lamb, hard-boiled egg, and a selection of bitter herbs, as well as other items, may be included. Each of the foods carries symbolic value relating to the historic events being remembered. The meal ends with the perennial wish, next year in Jerusalem. The story of Hanukkah actually begins about 300 years BCE when Alexander the Great conquered Syria, Egypt, and Babylonia. He promoted a form of Hellenism, encouraging Greek forms of dress, culture, and language, but he was not harsh in his rule. There is a legend that while marching through Jerusalem, he encountered a high priest of the Jewish temple and told him to erect a statue in Alexander's honor within the temple. The high priest said no, this was forbidden under Jewish law, but that the Jews would promise to name all of their firstborn sons after him instead. Alexander agreed to this. For a time, coexistence was possible, but the very different worldviews of the Jews and the Greeks inevitably led to a threat to the very existence of Judaism. Alexander's successors in the region were Syrians, and they were far less accommodating to differing cultures. In 167 BCE, the Syrian king Antiochus began to openly persecute the Jews. His Greek name was Epiphanes, meaning like Zeus. But the Jews called him Epimanes, meaning the madman. He appointed a puppet high priest, prohibited the study of the Torah, and sacrificed pigs on the temple altar. Within 2 years, the Jews rebelled under the leader of Judah. His forces were called the Maccabees. I learned of 2 quite different stories about how they got that name. In one, the leader's nickname was Maccabee, which means the hammer. In the other, Maccabee is an acronym for the Hebrew words, who is for God. In any event, the revolt of the Maccabees was finally successful, and the Syrians and Greeks were evicted from Israel. The temple was liberated. It had been defiled and therefore needed to be rededicated, and it is here that the miracle later celebrated as Hanukkah happened. There was only enough undefiled oil left to burn in the lamps for 1 day. But the lamps stayed lit for 8 days, long enough to secure a new supply of oil. Over time, Hanukkah evolved a set of customs, including a celebration of 8 days and the lighting of candles, which become brighter with each night. Hanukkah is intended to be a joyous holiday, a celebration of light and liberation. The Hanukkah candles are a symbol of resistance not only to tyranny, but also to assimilation. The Jews had successfully resisted a greater power that sought to force them to abandon their traditions and their religion and accept another. The light of Hanukkah is provided by a traditional candelabrum called a menorah. It has 8 candles in a row and 1 set apart. This is called the shamash, or servant candle. On the first night, a candle is placed on the rightmost holder of the menorah. The shamash is lit, the blessings are said, and then the shamash is used to light the first candle. On the second night, 2 candles are placed in the menorah, starting on the right and adding to the left. The newest candle is lit first. 1 more candle is added each night. The candles are traditionally allowed to burn down. There are a number of other traditions associated with Hanukkah. At times and places where it's been safe to do so, the menorah could be placed in a window, visible to passers-by, to proclaim the miracle and share it with the public. Obviously, that has not always been safe. Certain foods are often served. When you consider that the holiday is a celebration of the miracle of oil that lasted for so long, perhaps it's not surprising that rich foods are served then. Latkes, or fried potato pancakes, and jelly donuts are 2 common foods for Hanukkah. I knew about the latkes, but the jelly donuts was a surprise. Another custom is that the children play with dreidels, spinning tops. While still under the Greek tyranny, Jewish kids were not allowed to study the Torah. They went out into the forests to do this, but still, they knew that a Greek soldier might come along at any time. They took their tops with them, ready to hide their books and appear to be playing. This reminds me of my grandmother's stories about her grandfather, who taught in the hedgerow schools in Ireland. The British had decreed that no Irish child should learn to read, so students and teacher would dive into the hedgerows and hide if a British soldier came into view. Nowadays, dreidels are marked on their four sides with the Hebrew letters Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin. These letters are an acronym for the sentence in Hebrew that means a great miracle happened there. In Israel, the sentence is now changed to a great miracle happened here. When I think of Jewish festivals, I don't think of gambling. However, gambling games are sometimes played with the dreidel. The stakes are small, usually pennies or chocolates. Gelt is a word for small amounts of money given as gifts. In the U.S., Hanukkah gifts have morphed in some families into the same excess as the Christmas celebration. In fact, Hanukkah is often called the Jewish Christmas. I think that this identification came about largely because Christmas has become a season rather than a day, and Hanukkah often occurs during this season. Jewish parents, who in the past gave only small gifts to their children, may feel some pressure to keep up with the Christians in the matter of generosity. And Jewish children may feel left out as they hear their friends talking excitedly about what they hope to get for Christmas. I asked the congregation if anyone had memories or stories of Hanukkah to share. Myrtle told me that when she was a child, you only got one present for Hanukkah. And she thinks this was a common practice in her community. Since her parents worked evenings in her mother's store, it was only she, her grandmother, and her sister who lit the menorah and sang the traditional Hanukkah song, Rock of Ages, Let Our Song. Myrtle pointed out that the song is in our hymnal, and we will be singing this together at the end of the service. She also likes another one in our hymnal, number 221, Light One Candle. Myrtle loaned us the lovely menorah we are using today. She told me that it is fairly close in design to the one her grandmother had. Hanukkah begins at sundown on the 25th day of the Jewish month Kislev. Thanksgiving takes place on the fourth Thursday in November, according to the Gregorian calendar. And for the first time this year, the two holidays coincided. But because the Jewish calendar is lunar-based and the Gregorian calendar is solar-based, it is likely that the two holidays will never coincide again. The Star Telegram had an article last week about Thanksgiving. I am not making this up. Which proves to me that silliness is very ecumenical. It suggested that the two holidays might again coincide in the year 79,811. If no adjustments or changes are made to either calendar. So it seems that we will never know. Actually, Hanukkah is much more like Thanksgiving than Christmas. Christmas, like Easter, Passover, and Yom Kippur, has its origins in spiritual beliefs and can hold profound spiritual significance for those who celebrate it. Hanukkah and Thanksgiving are based on actual historical events that their adherents seek to remember and celebrate. They want to recall the sacrifices that their ancestors made, the hardships they suffered, and their ultimate success. They also both serve to remind us to be grateful for our current gifts and good fortune. I have been thinking a lot about tradition lately, perhaps because of the time of year. In my family, the Thanksgiving menu is almost sacred. If I were to change it, the men in my family would be in tears. Turkey, potatoes, stuffing, pumpkin pie, those are essential. I can add a fruit salad or an extra vegetable if I want to, but there is to be no messing around with the basics. We've made friends with a young couple who are both immigrants, one from Chile and the other from Ecuador. From the first time we invited them to share our Thanksgiving meal, they have loved the food. And they asked us to explain why we do what we do and eat what we eat. Having to explain a tradition is surprisingly difficult. We do it because we have always done it and can't remember doing anything else. Does not serve as a sufficient answer. Bob and I had to dust off our history lessons before we could really make sense. And then we still weren't there. We had to add the value that we have learned over time in coming together every year at the same time for the same meal with actual family or creative family, sharing one special day. Tradition creates shared memories, and those memories bind us together. It can be something as small as a family joke. Mentioning eagles carrying away Cub Scouts brought forth gales of laughter in my family. I don't remember the joke's origin, but I still think it's funny, and so does my brother. Family traditions are powerful bonds. We mourn the loss of older relatives for many reasons, including the fact that with their death, we have lost their memories. Traditions also bind together whole societies. Americans of all faiths eat the same turkey every year on the fourth Thursday in November and relish it every time. How much deeper the bonds created by shared belief and shared ceremony. As Jews around the world light candles and say prayers, they know that they are part of a chain of tradition that stretches back through history. No matter how separate they may be, they all create the light that shines for 8 nights, and they are together in tradition. As we rise in body or spirit and join in singing our closing hymn number 223, Rock